Cameras in the human eye are intriguingly similar in the way they see and perceive the world. However, our eyes don't always see the world in the same way a camera might. In fact, there are many differences that distinguish what we see from what is real. By looking at the anatomy of a camera and the anatomy of the eye, we can begin to distinguish the different ways that these two things interpret light, the world around us. So both the human eye and the camera have mechanisms to be able to control, shape, and redirect light to be able to achieve focus. In cameras, they have a lens which inside contains a series of glass elements. These elements move back and forth to be able to achieve focus. Now, the eye has a cornea, which acts much like the glass elements of a lens. So the cornea, together with the lens of the eye, which lies directly behind the iris, they respond to change in focus by actually changing their shape. So they're not moving back and forth like a camera might, but they change their shape. So both cameras and our eyes also need to regulate the amount of light that's let in. Anyone who's ever walked from a dark room to a bright room knows how it feels when your eyes have to adapt to that. So when an eye is exposed to bright light, its pupil shrinks as to not let in so much light. And in the similar way, anyone who's gone outside to watch the stars has experienced their pupils getting really big. Now the eye does that to let in as much light as possible. That's also why over time, your pupil will get even more relaxed, allowing you to see things in the dark that you didn't see before. And I'll share an example with that later in this presentation. Now, cameras do the same thing, but with an origami type aperture that lies inside of the lens. Now, this aperture can open and close to be able to regulate the amount of light let in. This is how a photographer or a videographer can expose for their image. So how closely do these two methods relate? Well, let me show you, because there's effects when you change the aperture or the size of that closing. So I want to do an experiment. I would like you to hold your left thumb in front of your face. Now I want you to look at that thumb with one or two eyes, it doesn't matter. But while looking at that thumb, think about what you're seeing in the background. Is the background clear and in focus, or is it blurry? I'm going to bet that it's blurry. Now, I want you to take your other hand, and with your index finger and the base of your thumb, you're going to create a very small hole, almost like a pinhole. You're going to look through that, just where you can barely see through it. I want you to look at your thumb, and also look at the background. Now, is the background blurry, or is it in focus? Again, I'm going to bet that it's in focus this time. So this actually tells us a great principle of photography called depth of field, but it also relates to our eye in the same way. Now, when you made a small hole with your hand, that represented a small aperture, right? A small closing right there. Now, when you have a small aperture, it narrows your depth of field, or you don't have as much blurriness in the background. With a big aperture, or when you didn't use your other hand at all, that represented a shallow depth of field, meaning that it was really blurry in the background. Maybe some of you have wondered why a phone camera may not give the same effect as a professional camera might. And that's because the elements inside of a camera lens are extremely small, but they're there. So a camera inside of a phone has an aperture that's extremely small, and with an aperture that small, you can't produce naturally the depth of field that a larger camera would. Now, how do cameras and our eyes actually capture and interpret light? How does it process that data? Now, cameras and our eyes both have their distinct types of photoreceptors. A camera has an image sensor while our eyes have a retina. So camera cameras have light-sensitive receptors that calculate a luminosity value and send it to a small computer for processing. In front of that sensor, there's also a small filter called a Bayer filter. On that filter, there are certain receptors to perceive different colors. There's one for red, there's one for green, and there's one for blue. Now, these color receptors are distributed evenly across the sensor. Our eyes, on the other hand, are far more complex. The photoreceptors in our eyes, called cones, naturally respond to color. In the light of day, we have 3 types of cones. One for red, one for blue, one for green, kind of like the camera. However, our eyes use something called rods to be able to see in low light. So when we're in low light or at night, we actually can't see color because rods don't see color. Now, I want to show you an example of this so that you know I'm not crazy. So I once took a trip to photograph the stars in Arches National Park. Now this photo of Double Arch was taken at about 1:30 a.m. I might also add that there was 0 light there. However, what you see here in this photo was not what I was experiencing at the time. I was there for a while, so my eyes had already adjusted to my surroundings and I could get around without falling. I could see my way around. However, I could not see color because my eyes could not use the cones. Rather, my eyes had to use rods, which don't see color. Now, cameras also have a function to change their sensitivity to light, like eyes would in a dark sky. However, this ability to change their sensitivity is not nearly as effective as the human eye. Now, these discrepancies in our anatomy often make us see the world as it is not. Our brain is extremely good at filling in the gaps where our eyes fail us. I'm going to show you another example of this. So I want you to get a piece of paper, or you can do this in your own time or right now. And I want you to take it and draw 2 dots about 3 inches apart. Now with those 2 dots, you're going to close, let's say, your left eye. Okay? You're going to hold that paper about 6 inches away from your face. And closing your left eye and using your right eye, you're going to look at the left dot. Now, if you move the paper closer or further away from you, you'll see that that dot actually disappears. Now, it happens because where your eye processes data is also where the optic nerve lies. So there's actually a blind spot in our eyes that we can't see, but our brain fills it in, and I bet none of you have never even noticed that. No one has. Our brain is extremely good at doing this. Now, it's for that reason that we're extremely susceptible to optical illusions. For example, in this image, does it look like the room is moving? Well, here's the deal. It's not. It's incredible how close we've come to mimicking the human eye with these little machines, the cameras. The cameras already surpassed what the human eye can see, and it'll only continue to get better. So the next time you take a photo or you see the world through a camera, just know you're not seeing exactly what our eye sees. I guess you could say you're not seeing eye to eye. Thank you.